We are going to get started. We have a distinguished guest with us, Everett, and he has a 5-page bio here. And so that's why I was kind of confused with how to even get started. But one thing that has been shared with us is that he is a dear friend of Jeannie and Stan Bissey. And so we're thankful that Jeannie and Stan have arranged to have the Honorable Everett Alvarez with us. Jr. with us. He is the first American aviator shot down over North Vietnam, was held prisoner 8 years and 6 months, and is willing to share his story with us today and how maybe in ways faith helped to sustain you during that time. That would be sort of an interesting angle for us, but however you are planned to share. So why don't we get started with a word of prayer, and then Stan will introduce our distinguished guest. Holy One, we come before you humbled by all of your provision for each and every one of us in goodness and in difficulty. And we're thankful that you have brought to us one who is your faithful follower and who has sustained difficulty, and you have brought him through. We are attentive to the ways that you work in each other's lives and in our lives and in the lives of those we know, and pray that you will attune us to where you are present today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Hey, Stan. Stan, if you want to, do you want to use the podium? You're welcome to use the lectern here.
Oh, okay.
That's helpful.
Be fine.
Yeah.
You're okay.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Well, it's my honor and Jeannie's honor to introduce Everett Alvarez, who's, as you have already heard, is the first aviator pilot who was shot down over Vietnam, and he was held as a prisoner of war for 8 years and 6 months, and we're honored to be, hopefully part of his family. Our children grew up together. They have 2 boys. We have 2 boys, and our eldest the 2 eldest went to school together, both in elementary and part of high school. And it's been a very wonderful opportunity for us to get together. And also, I want to introduce Everett's wife, Tammy. She's back in the back sitting next to Jeannie. And at any rate, Everett has done many things and had many honors in his name. He's had boats, ships named after him, buildings. Matter of fact, the post office in Rockville is named after Everett Alvarez Jr. And it's been an honor for us to have this opportunity to get our children together. Our children, both boys, have kind of had some, opportunities to travel together also, but they also had some accidents involved in their travels too. So they've had a few horrific things happen.
And spoke at our children's graduation at the Kennedy Center several years ago.
Yes. So anyway, I'd just like to say that it's our honor to have Everett, and he's got very many honorary degrees. He has become an attorney since he came back, and has got different doctorate type of degrees, honoraries, as well as others. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Everett Alvarez. I'll call him the Honorable Everett.
Well, thank you so much. It's nice to be here today. There are some more seats up in front here.
Yep, got 3 right there.
As Stan was saying, we've lived in this community quite a while. We moved here in 1976 after I finished the postgraduate school. which is where I was assigned with it at Monterey, California, where I earned my master's in operations, research and systems analysis. And of course, before that, we had been released from that. Hard to believe that 61 years have passed since I was shot down in Vietnam. And I don't know how many of you recall in August of 1964, the Tonkin Gulf incident. But if you do, that was probably the point where the Vietnam War escalated from our being primarily advisors in South Vietnam to escalation to extending the war to the north. And then that was followed by building up our troops in the south. And I'll never forget that day when I was shot down. And I recalled getting hit. I was flying an A4 Charlie aircraft off the USS Constellation. Compared to today's aircraft and modern systems, I would say that resembles flying bi-wing aircraft. It was so far back. And but that was our first real buildup of using jet aircraft for a lot of missions. I was hit while exiting the target area. I was flying very low, treetop level, as fast as a plane would go, about 450 knots. And at that speed, the plane doesn't react very well to getting hit by ground fire. It started to come apart. I recognized right away that I was in serious trouble. The fire warning lights came on. The hydraulic system failure lights came on. Every emergency possible happened, and I realized that I had little choice but to eject. And so I said farewell over the radio. See you guys later. And I ejected, pulled a face curtain, and the seat went out. I realized that I was not in a position where the ejection would take me up like it's supposed to. The plane was coming apart, and I believe I was thrown out this way. And point is that I had very little time to think about it. I figured if I stick with it, I'm not going to make it. So I better go now, and maybe I'll survive. When I felt the chute pop, because you sort of gray out, you know, your consciousness hitting the blast, you sort of gray out. And I recognized that I was sort of going through the air at a fast speed, and then the parachute popped, and 2 swings later, I was in the water. And looking back up, when I got rid of my parachute, I saw that my body had come over a cliff. I could see the cliffs up here. And I had come down here this way. In retrospect, had I waited a couple of seconds longer, I wouldn't have, but I had a parachute. And if I had pulled the curtain 3 or 4 seconds earlier, I wouldn't have cleared the terrain up here. So I've done a lot of thinking about that ejection. And I was very fortunate. I hit that window. And so I'm here today. And I figured God had a plan for me. So that's something that I've carried with me all along. Let me give you a little background. I was born and I was raised in California, which is Salinas, which is about 20 miles from beautiful Monterey, Pebble Beach, Carmel. But we were a family that my parents had been migrant workers. My mother had a 3rd grade education. My dad had a 7th grade. And they married young, because back in those days, that's what you did. Families stuck together. And it was right during the Depression. As many of you are familiar with the Steinbeck's
Grapes of Wrath,
East of Eden.
or East of Eden, yeah,
And
we read about
and the Grapes of Wrath.
Grapes of Wrath, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up with a lot of the families that had migrated to California. So we lived in a large area that was the unincorporated area across the tracks. And the tracks divided the city of 10,000 people in those days from the unincorporated area. And so all of my friends were what we lovingly used to call Okies and Arkies, but people who were hardworking, cared about their families, and those were the values that we grew up with. I was lucky. My dad and mom stressed education, stressed hard work. My mother, when I was about 12 years old, would get me up before sunup and pack a little lunch and send me over to my dad's cousin who sort of managed a ranch. And he'd load me in his kids and myself. And we went out and all day carried these pipes, irrigation pipes, and moved them around because Salinas is known as the lettuce capital of the world. Just 8 miles down the road from Castroville, which was the artichoke capital, and south of Gilroy, which was the garlic capital of the world. I guess I was brainwashed. I thought I was in heaven there, but I was lucky. Back in those days, we had a good public school education. California had one of the best in the country, and I was able to participate, learn. I had great mentors. I had a coach in high school that believed in me and encouraged me. I went to a local junior college, or now they call them, I don't know what they call them today, two-year colleges. And I had a good professors who, really helped me. Then I went on to the university, Santa Clara. Now, growing up, I had a good friend that I grew up with. Met him in third grade. His name was, Joe Cap. I don't know if you ever, heard of Joe. He grew up later to be the quarterback for the Vikings. In the Super Bowl. We used to work out there and play in the lettuce fields. In fact, our elementary school was right almost in the middle of a lettuce field. And for recess, we'd just go out and pick up these lettuce heads, iceberg lettuce heads, and throw them back and forth. He always was accused of having wobbly passes. Oh, I can tell you why. But he was also the role model, very close. He was like a brother. I didn't have a brother. I had sisters, two of them. So, and he had sisters. His family had moved out after the war. And back in those days, they would convert these barracks that were military bases to housing. And Joe's dad moved his family into one of these housing projects that were converted barracks. Still had the barbed wire around the perimeter. It had a gate, and that gate barrier was always up. People drove in and out, but Joe always claimed he lived in the gated community. I lived there. Anyway, where I lived, we could have horses graze the front of the yard and chickens in the back. All that. It was really not very well. Well, let's put it this way. I don't think that would go here. So I grew up that way. And one day, when we were in the third or fourth grade, we noticed that every Thursday, some of the kids would stand up and leave early. And they would do this every week on a Thursday afternoon. So so Joe said, what's going on? And I didn't know. So we asked the teacher, and she said, oh, those are Catholic kids. They're going to catechism, which was held in a neighboring house in the garage where the nuns would come in and hold catechism classes. And of course, Joe and I were both Catholic. We were baptized, but our families didn't go to church. We came from families that they went to church for weddings and funerals. And that was about it. So then we heard that the nuns will also offer cookies and milk. So we said, hey, we're Catholic. And we started going out. Well, the first thing they did, we were two of the youngest kids, so they asked us, said, you guys, we need altar boys. And we said, okay, that's great. So they said, since we were the youngest, we got to be altar boys at the 6:30 mass on Sunday mornings. We'd ride down to church a couple of miles on our bicycles, still dark, our headlights on this thing. But we learned pretty quick what it means to be the youngest of altar boys. Anyway, when I got older, went off to college, I chose to go to Santa Clara, which was a Jesuit school. And I had some pretty good mentors there. After that, I graduated, went right into the Navy, their aviation training program, pilot training, because I always wanted to be a pilot. And I was fortunate. I passed the entrance exam, and I got to go to flight training in Pensacola, Florida. and which they still, by the way, have their primary
Mhm.
flight training programs in Pensacola, Florida. There's a lot of history there.
Mhm.
So I get shot down, 61 years ago. I found myself the first American in a prison in downtown Hanoi. And it's a place that we later nicknamed it the Hanoi Hilton. Americans were like that. They always give it their own name. Some of these names are pretty wild. Some I can't repeat. But this audience.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that's one thing they always did. So here I was for the first 6 months by myself, and scared, you bet your life, bewildered, not knowing what was going to happen, or what have you. And so I realized that it was myself against the whole Vietnamese government, North Vietnamese at the time. I attempted to, and I did stick to, as we were trained to do, if you're captured, name, rank, service number, and date of birth, right?
Mhm.
Well, that worked for a few days, until about a week later when I was confronted, the officer in charge came back in and had a satchel full of newspapers and magazines, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, every major newspaper from the United States, my hometown newspaper, all about me, my family. It showed my high school activities, my high school yearbook, my friends, interviewed, what have you. So I thought, gosh, name, rank, service number. Not going to go here. Then he said, "Are you hungry?" Well, I'm not going to say I can't answer that. I was always hungry. And so I asked, I was really not knowing I was being threatened by Vietnamese at the time. I was going to be held, going from a military tribunal. I was not a POW, as I claimed I was, because the United States had not declared war, and there were no relations. So I felt, I really need somebody to talk to. And I somehow remembered, so it was in the back of my mind, and they had me in a room about 8 by 10 in that prison complex. I had a little outside area where I could go out and use a vat, and there was a water closet in the corner. My first experience when I was a kid, you used to have outhouses. But I never a water closet like these, little footsteps and so, and no place to sit. So, but I learned real quick. Anyway, just while I was out there, that one day I decided I got a hold of a rusty a nail of some sort that somehow had come off the roof. And I started etching across. So I knew I needed to talk to somebody. And so every day I would have my ritual. And all of a sudden, all these practices of being an altar boy, I could remember portions of the Mass, and I would repeat that. And
Sorry.
You get any more sound for
Can people not hear? Can people hear okay?
Can you hear in the back?
Can you hear in the back? All right,
Well,
we don't have a sound system for this room.
okay.
Maybe,
I'll try to
project.
speak- I'll try to speak up. And if you can't hear me, just go like that and I'll try to do that. Anyway, I resorted to, you have to develop routines. You have to develop routines. So I started to do that. And every morning when I had a chance to go out, to get out, first ritual in my routine, I would try to recreate the mass. And I found that to be very, very helpful. At least I had a friend to talk to, and that's how I looked at it. And when people said, "My goodness, you were all alone," yes and no. And they said, "Well," I said, "I had a friend up there."
Mhm.
I was able to speak to my grandson's school a few years ago. He was about, I think he was about 9 years old, but I spoke to the older students, and because Caleb, my grandson, was my grandson, he was younger, they let him come in, and I spoke to the kids. And then Caleb went home, and his mother said, how'd it go? How did it go today? What did Grandpa have to say? He says, "Oh, he had a friend upstairs."
Yeah.
But believe me, I was alone for 13 months and 8 days. But who's counting, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you folks were fortunate. You had a parishioner, I think, Jackie and Mike Cronin.
Yes.
Mike was, passed away a couple of years ago. And he's here. Jackie's not here today. And
Her birthday, she's here.
that's exactly what I was gonna say. I read it.
Yes.
And then today we're fortunate also, I think, to, you may know,
Yeah, Emily.
Emily Reynolds, who's sitting next to my wife there. Emily's husband, John Reynolds, also deceased, was a POW with us, shot down Air Force general. He became general later on. He was one of the junior officers, and so I have people in the audience to keep me straight, so I don't wander off too much. Anyway, that was a very difficult period for me, but I made it through. And I had an awful lot of conversations. I was alone until one day I was able to discover on the bottom of a dish that they served when they came around in the prison. There was a message scratched from the bottom. And that's how the POWs were communicating with those that they weren't in touch with. That's how I made the initial contact. And once the Vietnamese found out that I was in touch with them, they moved me in with the others. So that's a very memorable day. I felt like I had been released, even though I was still in the cells, even though I was still solitary. I had communication with the others, and I was back with the guys. It was interesting because they had already set up a system of tapping. That's how they communicated, tapping through the walls, and I'm sure many of you are read about that. I can describe it if you like later. But one of the things that they said on Sunday mornings, we have church service. And of course, we were not allowed to talk to other cells. And we were supposed to, not, if we had a cellmate, you had to keep your voices low so you weren't heard outside. And if you were caught communicating or talking loud, you were punished. And so, the church service really happened at a certain time when a signal was sent by the senior officer. And then everybody would stand in their cell and recite the Lord's Prayer. And when we finished that, we turned to face east, put our hands over our hearts and sing the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States. And that was our church service. And it's something that we did every Sunday morning for the entire time. Starting in 1965 when I joined the group to 1971 when they finally allowed us to hold our church services, and we could sing our carols or what have you. 1971, conditions had improved, and collectively we decided to hold our church service and started singing. Of course, up until then we weren't allowed. And one big cell would break out and start singing, because by that time we had people living in large cells. And this was after the Sante raid, where the American government went in and tried to rescue POWs that were in one of the outlying camps. And so our church, we finally said, okay, enough, and we started singing. And they tried to stop us. And one big cell would break out and start singing, then another cell, and another cell. Finally, they brought in the riot squad and started with the fire hoses and what have you. But that event was over. And like I say, it was 1971. Things were improving for various reasons. That they finally gave in and said, Jim Ross says, you can have church service. So it took many years. All along, we had an objective, a goal, where that was, we all knew we were going to come home. We didn't know when. And especially starting in 1969, 1970, conditions improved so that we were pretty sure we were going to make it. And our goal was to come back with honor, return with honor. And some of the guys designed a plaque, which we still have, of our group. We called it the 4th Allied POW Wing. When you get a lot of senior officers in the military together, I don't know why it is, but they created a bureaucracy. So they created this organization, and we were called the 4th Allied POW Wing. Now notice it's a wing, not an air group, not a squadron. See, these were senior guys, were the Air Force guys, and so we were a wing. 4th, because the first POW group was World War I, the second was World War II, Korea was 3, so we were the 4th Allied wing. And that's because we had some South Vietnamese and Laotian pilots that were in our group. And they were, by the way, they were extremely helpful in our camp system, communication and what have you. So in 1973, we came home in groups. I was in the first group, and having been gone 8.5 years, if you can imagine being removed from society, from your family for 8.5 years, coming back, there'd be some changes. And so it didn't take long to get back and try to get caught up and what have you, and keep busy, but we did. So of the 660, 62, I believe, POWs that were shot down in the north, there were others held in the south, and they came home too in 1973. But of the 662 of us that were air crewmen, pilots and air crew, there's about 300, and last count 30 still living. And most of those were the young junior officers that were shot down at the end of the war. There's a couple of us that are pushing 100. Not me. But overall, they did pretty well. We came home, a lot of them, most everybody went on to get further education. We had 10 that went to medical school, became doctors. We had a large number to law school, 4 souls, including myself. And we had a few that went became politicians. They were still included in the group. But I know that you probably have a lot of questions. I've been talking for about close to what, 20, 30 minutes? 15? I'm not too good.
No, we've got time for questions.
But if anybody has any questions, please.
Were you with John McCain?
One of the first questions people ask.
I worked with him for a while.
When they find out I was up field in North Vietnam first, oh, do you know John McCain? John was shot down in 67. So he was there almost 5.5 years. And I got to know him. Interesting story. Yeah, so he, in 1970, when they had the Sante raid in 71, about later on in 71, they had us in these large groups, cells, because all the POWs were brought in from outlying camps and put into the Hanoi Hilton. They used to move us around from camp to camp, and there was no rhyme or reason that I can tell you why they did that, except maybe they wanted to keep us from developing, plans of escape and what have you. Anyway, so we were living in large groups, and they'd taken down a lot of the barriers, so the area was wide open, and I had all these large cells of 40 to 50 people per big cell. And I looked across one day, and everybody was like greeting each other, what have you. And there was a fellow standing across the yard, shocking white hair, his arms like this, standing in the door. And everybody he met, he would talk to them, and he would pat them on the back and shake their hands, and very, very, lively. And so I said, I asked the guy next to me, I forget who that was, and I said, "Who's that fellow?" And he looks, he said, "Oh, that's Johnny McCain." And of course, we had all heard about him by our communication, Tabby and what have you, and we knew everybody's name. And I looked at him, and I remember saying to this fellow, that guy's going to be a politician. Either that, or he's going to be the world's greatest used car salesman. Good story. I'm reminded of that, gosh. I was reminded of that, story about 6 months ago.
Have you been back to Vietnam since?
I have been back to Vietnam, 3 times. First time I went back, was in, 90, 92.
92.
I hear someone saying 92.
Just make up a number.
It was just before normalization. Before normalization, was that 92?
I think your
Anyway.
wife is the one saying it, so I'm.
That's when Mark graduated high school.
Yeah,
92.
1990, well, it was around 92, before normalization. And the, fellow that was a producer was trying to get 6 of us to go back. And he came and asked me if I would, go back with them because they wanted to shoot a documentary. And they wanted to shoot it in the old Hanoi Hilton. And the urgency was that, the Vietnamese government was going to tear down the Hanoi Hilton because it was such a black mark on Vietnam, in world public opinion. Bad things happened there. And, the world knew about it. So they were gonna just get rid of it. And so, I said, at that time, I said, you know what? And I believe that I was just starting my business too. And I just didn't have the time. And if I was gonna take a week or so or more, I was gonna go to the beach, and I really didn't care to go, but he was persistent. And I got curious, and I said, okay, I'll go back. I'll go with you, but I'm only going to go to Hanoi. I'm not gonna go to these other places that he wanted to, shoot some film. One of the fellows that, he was taking back had been, oh no, 2 of them. 2 of the fellows had been brought up from the south after the Tet Offensive. So they were captured in 68. There was this big, offensive, and so they captured a bunch of people, a lot of civilians, brought it back to the north, up north. And so I didn't want to go traipsing all over the countryside, but I said, I will go to Hanoi. And so my wife prepared a packet to take with me, like toilet paper, spray, things of that nature. It was a big package. And so I went. Before I went, though, by this time I had developed a pretty good relation with John McCain, because he was on Capitol Hill, and I had worked for President Reagan, and I had been started out as the deputy of the director of the Peace Corps, and then I went as the deputy of the VA system, I think, for about 4 years. And so I had worked with a lot of people on Capitol Hill, and so John and I were pretty close. And and John had just gone back to Vietnam with the broadcaster
Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite, yeah. And they had gone, Walter Cronkite had gone back, and they filmed and what have you. So I called John, because people were concerned about me, that I would have a real problem, with post-traumatic stress.
Sure.
I think if I had post-traumatic stress, it would be from working on Capitol. Anyway, and John had gone. And so I called him and I said, look, John, You just went to Vietnam. I know. I said, well, I'm gonna go. I'm supposed to go too. And, he said, great, go ahead. And I said, did you have a problem? And he said, oh, Everett, don't listen to that BS. Just go have a good day. He says, go to the lake where they have a statue. My statue's in the lake. 'Cause when he was shot down, he landed in the lake and he would have drowned had they not pulled him out. And when they found out who he was and he went through, and we came home, they erected a statue where he was captured. And he said, go see the statue. And then he told me what hotel to stay in. Well, in 92, before normalization, in Vietnam, there was probably one decent hotel.
Metropolitan,
And the Metropolitan.
yeah.
And he said, stay at the Metropolitan, because that's where he stayed. And Walter Cronkite. I wasn't Walter Cronkite, I was not. And so we went to some old hotel that was air conditioned. And so, anyway, he said, go, yeah, have a good time. And he told me what restaurants to go to. It seems like you've been there.
Yeah, it does seem like.
And he said, what restaurants? And he told me what bars to go to. And leave it to John to have all these names. Anyway, so we went. And I fully anticipated that they would make a big propaganda thing out of it. We'd be greeted with a girl or a woman with flowers, kids with flowers, and media. We pulled up and taxied in. The place was deserted. I was sort of disappointed. But it was a very interesting, nothing had changed from when we left. 1,000, I must have been 1 million peasants on bicycles, conical hats still. Stayed we got off the vehicle and first thing I noticed was dead rats in the gutter. And that's just how we left it. Went into this building that was our hotel, and there were 2 of us per room. Colonel Fred Sherry and myself. Fred was from Silver Spring, Maryland Air Force. His portrait hangs in the Air Force section of the Pentagon, and it's the Wall of Heroes, Hall of Heroes, and his portrait's right up in there. Anyway, Fred and I shared a room. We walk in, and the first thing we noticed was in the door jambs, a little chewing away. So we went down and got some bananas so we could throw them down by the door. And the rats come in, and we go after the food, not after our toes. We still had mosquito nets that we put up, and the air conditioner had a little unit, and it had a shower. So the shower was like you walk in and there's a little sink and a commode and a hose, and you sit on the commode and you shower. And that was basically one of the best hotels you can get at the time. I went back again after normalization. Things had changed a lot. A lot of Western money went in. These new hotels were coming up. One being the Opera Hilton. They had the second time they had torn down the old prison, and so the new hotels were just spectacular. There were a bunch of motor scooters, not that many bicycles left, a few automobiles. And the third time I went back, no bicycles, motor scooters, and automobiles, and everybody dressed Western.
Wow.
I mean, It was just, I don't recall, but, oh,
Oh, yeah.
the best hotel to stay in Hanoi, if you go, the old Metropolitan Hotel, totally remodeled.
Yeah.
I liked it better than the Hilton, the Opera Hilton, which was
Okay.
really, really,
Yeah.
really nice at the time. Yes, you had a quick
Can
question.
you talk about the tapping to communicate?
Oh, the tapping was you tap on the walls to the others, but you tap very softly, so you couldn't be heard, and there was a 5x5 square. So you have the row and you have the column. And so that if you want A is first row, I'll put it this way, I'm trying.
Yeah.
Okay, first row. So A would be row column. B would be first row. C. And then they go F.
Yeah.
Across and then all the way. And
You taught that
Z.
before you,
I'm sorry?
were you taught that during your military training? Or
No,
is it
no,
something you all
we
came up
learned
with
it. One
later?
of the fellows that was Air Force brought it in.
Wow.
And, we really developed it. So Z would be. Put your ear to the wall. It's like a typewriter's going off all over the place. Now you're gonna ask me. There's 26 letters in the alphabet.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, that's right. So the letter K, you see. Very simple. Very simple system.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, and if you didn't have voice contact, you, after listening for a while, you start to pick it up because the guys would over and over and over. And I used to make a joke about it, but I stopped. I would say it had to be simple because we had Marines in our group. Well, I said that one time. I was speaking to a corporate group, and I think it was Lockheed in Florida one time. And, everybody broke out except the president of the company. He was a Marine. He didn't care for that. They never invited me back. Anyway.
Did you communicate with the South Vietnamese who were holding you? And didn't they interrogate you at all?
Oh, the North Vietnamese.
North Vietnam, of course.
I went through a lengthy interrogation.
Did they beat you? I mean, did they?
But, I went through initially, they were very naive, about it. And I quickly learned, of course, I didn't know, how much they knew. And so
Did they speak English?
I quickly realized that I speak Vietnamese.
Did they speak English or did you?
Oh, they spoke English. They were all English speaking. Oh, yeah. And, but I quickly learned that their knowledge, of technology was very, very limited. They didn't know. And so after struggling with this, how much I should try, I wasn't gonna definitely talk to give anything that was classified, what have you. So I convinced them because I was young and I looked young. In fact, the first comment that one of their high-ranking people said is, "Oh, he's so young," and I'm like, "Oh, what does he know?" So I convinced them that I was a new pilot, and so I didn't know much about anything. And my job on the ship, I was in charge of the popcorn machine. You know how much time I spent trying to explain popcorn? Of course, they wrote everything you said, they wrote it down, longhand. They had notebooks and notebooks. They had popcorn, and they kept coming back to popcorn. Like, pop, pop. What is pop, pop? It goes pop, pop. I don't understand that. And others quickly learned the same thing, you know, like they were officers in charge of the swimming pool on the carrier. I don't remember what Mike Cohen could have, he had a similar experience when he was first shot down, something like that. I don't remember what, John, at the time, he wrote he wrote a book also. And he probably gave me some wild stories, but John was then, came later when they had learned a little bit and they were not pleasant at all. John was, he went through that period of time when they were, pretty harsh treatment and they had him alone. They were starving him. And this was in the building right in front of the building I was in one of the other camps we called the zoo. And so one of the guys that went in used to crawl in the ceiling down, drop food for portions of food for John. And because they were pretty much starving him. At the time, I mentioned the camp was called the zoo, and we gave the buildings names like the barn, chicken coop, so forth. And they called I remember when they came up with the name, people would come in and look in our cells. And, you know, a lot of people from the neighboring area would come and look. So one of the guys said, "We're going to call it the zoo because this is the only place where the animals come and look at the people." You know, things like that. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Well, it's such an honor to have you share your experiences with us. I'm just curious, 8.5 years is a really long time. How did you pass the time? Were you working all day? Was there?
Oh, no, we didn't. How did we pass the time was the question. We passed, but we were fortunate to have cellmates, roommates. We picked each other's mind a lot. Tapping through the wall. We tapped all day. And we would pass by information. You know, we knew everybody about the guys in the next cell. We knew all about their background. They were just tapping away. Our cellmates, we got to know them really good. Well, living with a person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for months and months and years, you know, you sort of, that's very close. You learn patience, I guess, tolerance. But then, of course, you took care of each other. And John's another example. He was critically injured, but his cellmates brought him. I mean, they cleaned him, they bathed him, they fed him. He couldn't do anything. He was in a cast like that. Not too many guys survived. And if you were seriously injured, John was one of the few that I know that made it because of his cellmates. And also the medical treatment. When they found out who his father was, they took him to the hospital. I don't know if, I wondered often whether or not that did him any good, because like I say, they put him in a body cast and he couldn't do anything. He was like that. So he was totally dependent on his cellmates. And you took care of each other. And you hung together, and we had an organization. And that's how we survived. We totally dependent on each other. A few people broke. A few people collaborated. A couple. I don't know. Well, they've all passed on, but there weren't too many of those. There were a few. And when we got back, they were ostracized basically by the group.
Everett, we want to honor your time, and I'm noticing our time is up. And I think it might be interesting to see who in this room was in Vietnam. Just spent some time in the war.
Oh, in the war.
Yeah. I'm sort of curious who was in the war. I know we could go on for hours and it's just fascinating to hear your story. And we're so grateful, your willingness to share it with us. I did read that there's a book that's been written. Is that true?
Yeah, yes. The book is Chained Eagle.
Chained Eagle. Okay.
It was written in 1988.
Okay.
The co-author is Stephanie Pitch, who also lived around here.
Okay.
If my wife buys them on Amazon,
Okay.
it's
So
Chained Eagle.
that's the story, your story,
It's the story of the POWs.
the POW. Okay.
POW story.
Okay. Let's show our appreciation. Yeah.